Hey, welcome back for another podcast. In this episode, I've got Jakob, the Chief Commercial Officer and co-founder of Australis, on board. For those of you who've been following me for any period of time would know that I'm an ex-semi-professional Counter-Strike player, and if you do follow CSGO at all, you know that Australis is one of, if not the most dominant CSGO team of all time. So it's an honor to have Jakob on today to talk about a lot of things, and I actually learned a lot from this podcast. There are a few bits of terminology and ways of thinking that Australis and Jakob pushed to me that's different than what I've ever thought about before. Some different ways of looking at influencers versus esports, and there's some things I'm going to be thinking about and maybe making some more content as I kind of decompress and go through those things in my mind. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Capsule Entertainment and the Bash Open League, and we talk about that in the podcast for a little bit as well. Hope you enjoy this episode. I really enjoyed it. Jakob, mate, we're live. How are you?
I'm very good. And you?
Yeah, good, man. Look, as a CSGO fan and ex-aspiring pro player, it's great to talk to someone who helps to run, one of the most ever dominant teams in CSGO. So it's good to have you.
The most dominant team ever.
Huh? The most dominant. There you go. I guess you'd be right to make that claim, right? Because, I guess NIP dominated in CSGO in the early stages, but let's be honest, CSGO, when I played semi-pro, was that stage, and it was a terrible game back then. It was full of bugs, had lots of problems, and when you guys dominated, it was a much more competitive landscape.
Yeah, I think, they had a great run, no question about it. But I think they also were by far the first ones to really see the potential of the game. I mean, I remember my players back then who were switching from Source in 1.6, they were mainly focused on the fact that they could set fire to stuff with Molotovs, and they were just laughing while they were playing, and they couldn't really take it seriously and said, this game is never going to be great. I think the NIP guys saw it early on, and they invested the time and efforts needed to become the best.
Yeah, and I think literally just saying it again, I think that people who are in the esports scene these days don't realize how it really was not a good game when it first came out. And the biggest global tournaments, I'm trying to think of some of the names, Face It. I remember when they ran the first tournament with that M1A1S skin, and that was huge tournament prize pool, and that was 40K, at that stage. And now obviously, $1 million majors and et cetera, it's just pales in comparison.
Yeah. It's the one example I always use when I laugh about these things is I remember Fragbite ran an online tournament back in the day with $15,000 US dollars in prizes, I think, and they called it the champions, or sort of the clash of champions, and it was all the major winners up until that point who faced each other. So back then, for $15,000, you could invite all the greatest team in the history of Counter-Strike. It costs a little bit more these days.
That's pretty crazy. And one of the things that was most exciting, like you said, for fans and players alike, was the combination of CS Source and CS 1.6. So for those people who are watching who don't realize, they were bitter enemies, and usually it was region based. Here in Australia, we played Source. In the US, they did have some people stayed with 1.6, but primarily it was Source. But over in Europe, except for France, it was primarily CS 1.6. But it was fantastic to finally see these two disciplines of people coming together. It's almost like the start of the UFC. It's who's going to win, karate versus wrestler. And the same with this. You got to see, CS 1.6, you could see them as more purists. They prefer to stay with the old game because the game was a lot harder, through bugs that became features primarily. Whereas Source was, if you go back and watch Counter-Strike Source, I used to think it was a hard game, but you find that mostly it's 5 bullet sprays to the chest where most of the kills happen from. So it's a bit more of you could say an arcadey game, I guess.
Yeah, I think the problem is that, you have to consider every game sort of a living organism that it develops and evolves as it's getting played and as it's getting developed by the company behind it. And I think a lot of the 1.6 players tried the first versions of Source and thought they were quite bad. And then they just never tried it again. And then when people spoke to them about Source, they thought of the Source that they tried a year and a half ago that was absolutely terrible, but the game was in a much better state. But I think at the end of the day, Counter-Strike Global Offensive is, I would say, from sort of a holistic approach, the best Counter-Strike game so far. But I think from there's probably a lot of people who will argue with me that from a competitive standpoint and sort of balance perspective, 1.5 is the golden child.
1.5, there you go. So I guess it's I guess if you were to think of the birthplace of esports as a whole, you'd have to give it to games like Quake Live 1.6 and StarCraft, but games have to evolve, and I guess what makes these games so popular is not only are they competitive esports, but they have to be decent for casuals. And obviously StarCraft 2 and Quake, they're not as open for casual players to come in as something like CS:GO. So I guess that's why CS:GO still reigns supreme as a tier 1 after all these years.
Yeah, I think you cannot discard sort of the games need to look good. The games need to feel good. They need to flow. And I think, no casual viewers who's going to watch Counter-Strike for the first time in their life, if they watched 1.3 or 1.5, is going to think, wow, that game is really nicely balanced. They can't feel that. They can't see that. And I think, Counter-Strike Global Offensive has an expression that works quite well on TV and it looks okay. Because I remember, I had a conversation back in the day when we did 1.6 tournaments with a potential sponsor of a graphic card. And I said, you need to sponsor this tournament. And he's like, I mean, you can run Counter-Strike 1.6 with your onboard graphic card. Yeah. Why should I spend my money on that? That's probably true. So I think Global Offensive has found a pretty good balance and looks good. But again, this is the interesting thing about esports compared to sports, right? The platform upon which the rules and laws is always changing. So imagine football in a world where gravity also all of a sudden could change. You could do new things with gravity, like. Football would be a crazy sport. So the reality upon which the games are set can constantly change. And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about the future of esports is where are we going to go? Is it VR? Is it AR? Is it something we don't know anything about yet? And I think that's what's really interesting about this space is that we have no way of saying what this is in 20 years.
Yeah, it's really funny you brought out that graphics card thing, but I realized that we jumped into so much that A, I didn't get you to introduce yourself, and B, I didn't do the ad read. So let me do the ad read quickly, and then we'll get back into it. So this podcast is sponsored by the Bash Open by Capsule Entertainment. So if anyone's following me on LinkedIn who's watching now, you'll see that I've been talking quite a lot about mobile esports recently, the rise of it in Southeast Asia, the absolutely insane numbers that are behind it, and some of the Western teams like Team Secret are starting to advance into that region. The Bash Open is a tournament for amateur mobile gamers across numerous Asian countries, backed by brands like Red Bull and Razer, and features over 300 teams participating in 2 titles. Bash Entertainment is a platform, which is an interesting one, which is mobile first on Android. So if you've got an Android phone, you can look it up on the Google Play Store, or you can go to capsl.cc to look it up. But essentially, it's a platform that allows you to create a mobile esports tournament in 30 seconds. There's a bunch of other platforms that are like this that are PC only and browser based, but obviously with Southeast Asia or Asia as a whole being mobile first, it makes sense to go there. So check them out. But Jakob, just I guess before we get into that, because I got an add-on, I guess I want to ask you about that graphics card statement that you made before. Can you just give a little bit of an intro into yourself, the company you work for, and its position in the market?
Sure. So I'm Jakob Kristensen. I am the Chief Commercial Officer and co-founder of Australis. I'm a bit of an esport veteran. I think, for many of the people who are involved in this space and the many of the people who have always been here for a couple of years, I'm very old school. But from my perspective, I'm not very old school. I am what I would probably refer to as sort of second generation esports. The first generation was the Quake players, the different variations that led up until Counter-Strike. When Counter-Strike started coming out, I was about 12 years old. So I played it, but I was by very, very far away from being relevant in the esports scene. That took a couple of years. But I've pretty much been doing everything from, running teams to running IRC channels back in the day to writing on websites to I was a writer for NIP when it relaunched back with the Heat on Party Arl team together with Mira, who's a big writer in HLTV now. It's so long ago. Then I ran Copenhagen Wolves, which was sort of my first serious thing that turned into an actual full-time job, or what was supposed to be one. And then in 2016, in January, I founded Australis together with the players and Frederick Buskov. And from there, we sort of those last 5 years, this January has sort of been full circle for me. So we went from Australis to Refresh Entertainment, which was sort of a portfolio company that ran Blast Pro Series, Origin, Australis, Godsend, a couple of other brands, all the way back to sort of last summer, not this summer, but last summer, we sort of split the company in two. Me and my co-founder of Refresh, Nikolai Nyholm, bought out the team side of the business, which was Australis, Origin, and Future FC, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, and FIFA, and now sort of rebranded it all back into Australis. So for me, the last 5 years has been like from one thing all the way around and then back to that one thing again. And on the day-to-day, I run all commercial operations, basically.
It was funny you were saying about feeling like you're a second generation, I guess, esports guy. Like what kind of year is that? When did you start working, even if it's volunteer within the space? When did you start taking esports seriously?
I think I was about 15, so that must be 17 years ago. I started pretending that I wasn't 15, that I was actually 18. Because back then you could start a team by renting a game server. If you had a game server, the team could play for you. I mean, I had guys who were later become quite professional players simply there because I had a game server. So I started doing all these different things, and then that sort of grew until I was around 18. Then it started getting a little bit more serious. And then I think the foundation of Copenhagen Wolves was like the first time I really and we won a spot in the EU LCS, which was a very sort of famous history here in Denmark because we had Bjergsen as our mid laner who was supposed to play, and then a week before or 2 weeks before the qualifier, we were told that he couldn't play because he was too young. So Bjergsen was 15 at the time. So we just signed some random guy. Like we had like 2 days on solo queue to find a player, and we still qualified. So that was quite something. We went from having 5 players that I barely paid any salary to needing to pay them full-time salaries, have a house in Cologne, and it was just. I mean, when I think back of it now, as we would say in Danish, my blue-eyed optimism of what I thought I could do and couldn't do was absolutely batshit crazy. But I think that's how you get where you are today, right? You just have faith in you can actually deliver on this, and then you just do your best.
So you said obviously you guys incorporated from Australis into Refresh as a portfolio company. So within that portfolio company you had an esports league. Why the separation? Is it because you wanted to focus primarily on teams where you're sitting today? Do you not see the upside in the leagues? Was it some internal discussions that people wanted to split ways, different management? Like what's the major reasons for that?
I think I can start by sort of my personal side of things. Australis was something that I started because I dreamt about it, basically. Like I was sitting at I know I have it somewhere and I want to find it so badly. I have like a notebook where I'm sitting there drawing stars, and like our logo is actually one of them, or close to. I needed a professional designer to sort of sharpen it up, but I was playing around with names, and I had a list of like 25 different names that I thought we could do a little bit of sort of insider information. Australis was actually supposed to be named something else. We were having the plans of calling it Spirit of Amiga, which is like the most legendary sort of Counter-Strike name in Danish history, SOA. Okay. And then we took it to the lawyers, and they said, anything computer related with Amiga in it, you can't do that. There's too many trademarks. But for me, Australis was a passion project. I think Blast was more of a board decision, a necessity thing. I loved it, and I'm very proud of what these guys have built it into. I think it's a great product. But for me, the passion point was always the teams. So that decision was very easy for me. I think we as a company made a decision to sell the teams off. And then I made it very clear to my co-founder and the board that I would like to go with the teams. That's where I want to go. And then I spoke to Nikolai about it, and he looked at me and said, why don't we buy the teams then? And then we went through a process where we did a management buyout, and we eventually bought the teams out. So I think also you have to remember that most of the investors in Refresh was venture. And venture usually likes, big reward, high risk. And I think Blast is more big reward, high risk, where the teams is more of a long, gritty sort of path to hopefully something great.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's something I've talked about, I guess, in the past, a lot of content, but not recently, is just trying to help people understand the difference between VCs wanting that sexy, scalable product compared to some other things which are not quite as sexy, like sometimes esports teams, other times back-end products, but can make some decent money. Owning a $1 million property portfolio that gives you a few percent returns, that's the furthest from sexy you could possibly have, or some slow growth stocks. But many people do make a great living out of that. But you're not making Newsy headlines, TEO headlines or Forbes headlines by doing something that's stable.
No, I think you have to remember that venture funds, more than anything, look for things where they can apply cash to create growth or grab land. That's basically what they want to do. And if you can build a business where they get an exponential more value based on how much cash they throw in, they can find a lot of cash. And I think with teams, it's more of a grind. I mean, we could buy a spot in the Call of Duty League, for example, but does that mean that our revenue goes up? A little bit, but we also have to find the sponsors. We also have to make the team work. We also have to do all these different things. So I think for them, the sort of the value proposition around Blast and sort of the media side of esports was just easier to understand and easier to execute on. So it made a lot of sense for them to sort of focus on that part. Where again, we with Australis sees this more as a 10, 20-year project. That we want to build over a very, very, very long time. And the focus is more to build sort of a sustainable business that can grow organically more than just, getting as much air into the balloon as possible.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. Yeah, and it was funny the other thing you said about being a second generation esports guy. I guess that probably would make me a third. I'd say I've been about 10 to 12 years, and it's always funny when when you get people come up to you and say, "Hey, you're such a veteran in the industry," but I just don't feel like one at all compared to like a Jens Hilger or compared to the guys that led the way for creating ESL. And running those tournaments at a small internet cafes. Like at one stage, I was playing in those tournaments as a little, not as a kid, but as an 18, 19-year-old playing CSGO or playing LAN parties at 15 and playing Battlefield 2 and things like that. Like I still feel like I'm so infant in the industry compared to those guys. But, there's not that many of those around these days.
No, there's not a lot left. And I think, obviously I had this conversation with Danny as well, Sonic, our coach. Like, he was like, if only I'd been born like 5 or 6 years later, I would have been the greatest player in the world right now. And I would have made a lot more than I did back then. But I think obviously he's in a very fortunate situation, so he can't complain. I think, to me, it's just been a mix of sort of being good at what I do and being quite lucky with the timing, to be honest. Because I think there was a lot of projects historically in Denmark that had the same sort of framework as Australis have had, some of the same ambitions and sort of pushes, but the market just wasn't ready for it.
Why is Denmark so advanced as far as it comes to esports?
I think I always say I think it's two things. Or actually, I think it's three things. So one thing is we're quite antisocial. People are going to hate me for saying this. But we had a London office in Refresh, and I was in London quite a lot. And I think, as soon as sort of office hours is over, everyone goes to a pub. Yeah, everyone goes out and they stand on the street and they talk and they hang out and do all these different things. In Denmark, the weather is shitty, to be honest. And we spend a lot of time indoor. And I think we sort of accept that is okay. Like, if you want to be by yourself, be by yourself. So I think that sort of plays into it. And then I think we're quite advanced technologically. So we a lot of kids had great computers and fast internet very fast, like before a lot of other countries had it. So I think that plays into it as well. And then I think the third one is that we have a little bit of I think actually the right term for it is Napoleon complex. Look, Danish people, if we're good at anything, we will celebrate it. We won a silver medal, I think, in curling or something back in the day. And there was parade in the city. We'll celebrate whatever we can celebrate. So I think once we sort of found the success that we did in esports, it just sort of grew a lot. This was something that we were proud of. And I think a lot of people backed that up. But I think, the crazy part is, yes, we're good at Counter-Strike, but we're good at a lot of other things as well. Like if you look at sort of League of Legends, etc., we've been historically insanely dominant. I think, per capita, we have the highest amount of pro league players outside of Korea, China, and the US who has their own leagues. But it's just, I don't know what it is, but there's something here that definitely works for us in computers.
Yeah, it's always been interesting to me. I talked to Harley Oliver at DSN, who played with Fnatic's dominant team in 1.6, and asked him the same question about Sweden. I've always wondered, why Denmark, Finland, and Sweden have been so far ahead for many years in Counter-Strike compared to any other esport or even just with esports pros. And his answer, I talked to him at the IEM Sydney, and his answer was very similar to yours. Primarily, it was around it being so cold outside that people want to stay inside, about internet and also access to computers. And it seems like internet's pretty important.
Oh, look, I mean, when we played tournaments way back in the day, there were always a couple of teams from sort of weird small Swedish cities, but that was because the government had put in a super fiber internet in that city, and then all of a sudden they were all great at Counter-Strike. So Umeå is a small Swedish city, 12 hours from Denmark, just straight up through Sweden. They always had 3 or 4 great teams in Counter-Strike, because they were one of the first sort of non-centralized cities that had very, very, very fast internet. Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and that probably explains why Australians have so many good influencers, because we're funny, but not that much great in esports because our internet's terrible here. I think we're ranked 60th in the world for internet speed or something like that, while being in a first world country. It's pretty abysmal. So what's the can you walk me through, and I know this is a very big question, but can you walk me through the basis of pathway to profitability for an esports team? Like, to me, it seems like, there's people have been talking about esports player salaries in the wings for a long time. Now Cloud9 has started to post what their salaries are. Their salaries are huge, compared to what you're expecting from sponsorship a lot of the time. So I guess it's a double part question. Like, first off, like, are the sponsorship and the money coming in, are they scaling well with those salaries that are increasing if they are your main costs? And then what's the pathway to profitability look like for you guys? Is it alternative revenue streams? Is it simply just getting more money from the people who currently work with you? Like walk me through that basic.
So I think at least from sort of outside the space, the biggest misconception is the fact that an esports team is only as valuable as sort of the books say it is. Like, can you make a profit and that is your profit? I completely disagree. I think if you look at American sports, the by far best appreciating asset that there is ownership in franchise leagues. Look at MLS, look at NBA, look at NFL, and even the worst NBA teams now is at around $1.2 billion worth, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you could get an NBA franchise for like $250 million 10, 15 years ago. So I think that is where you're really going to see the value. And I think what we're sort of looking into is, can we create a business that runs with a profit? I think that's possible with a pretty decent profit, while also sitting on the best sort of assets in the space that's going to be appreciating. Because I think if you're going to evaluate an NBA franchise, nobody's going to look at, what is the revenue of that franchise? That doesn't really matter. Like, what matters is they hold the spot at the table, and there's only a finite amount of spots at the table. And with that spot comes a lot of attention, comes a lot of money from media rights, etc. So for us, we sort of see the sponsorships, etc., as sort of the underlying foundation of what we do. We want to get to a point where our everyday business on a day-to-day EBITDA, sort of presence just runs and is in the bonus. But what's really interesting for us is what is the land that we can grab in regards to sort of finite value in franchise spots. And I think, we got a spot in the LEC, which is, I mean, look at the US where some of the slots that were bought originally has already been trading at 3x value. So that asset is absolutely massively valuable. We have spots in Blast Pro Series with the Counter-Strike team. We have spots in ESL Pro League. And I think sort of this system creates the stability and sort of the predictability that is needed for both the tournament organizers and the teams and the players to sort of plan their future and actually sign long-term partnership deals. Because for us now, historically we used to do 1-year deals in esports because nobody knew what was going to happen. Do you even have the same players in your roster in 6 months? Now we're in a position where a lot of the deals that we're doing is 3+ years, because we can actually predict the future. So I think the path to profitability, my sort of take on this is a little bit limited by the fact that we're a public company. So I obviously can't dive in too deeply besides what we've already said publicly. But I think originally our goal was for this year to become profitable. COVID-19 made that quite hard, but not impossible. So I think we will get there eventually. And that's going to be primarily driven by sponsorships still. But what we hope to see and what we will see is sort of this more model of what you look in regular sports club, where sponsorships is not 80% of your revenue. It's 35-ish.
Yeah, that's always been a really interesting thing to me. Like, I'm glad you mentioned, we're obviously on the same page about ownership of that asset. We had one of the head of commercials from AEG on before, and he talked about exactly that. They bought a bunch of MLS teams when they were dirt cheap. And, they've sold most of them, but held on to one, and talking about that appreciating asset as far as that goes. And it's always been interesting to me that, if traditional sports teams aren't often expected to turn a profit, and they often don't, even in the English Premier League, they can lose millions of pounds per year in operations. Why does somebody expect a whole other industry like esports, which mirrors sports so well, to be insanely profitable from second year, third year, when these teams haven't been able to do it in 40, 50, sometimes 100 years of operations, but they do hold on to that asset. If you want to buy, it's eye-watering to think how much, these EPL teams are worth, billions of dollars over that series of time.
Yeah, but I think that the problem also historically has been for esport that the way in has been, if you want to invest into esport and you want to sort of build something, the way in has been players. So imagine that someone signs the starting 11 of Manchester United, because they all have contract that runs out on the same day. And then the league is like, oh yeah, now you have the Premier League spot. And Manchester United is like, what? That's how it used to work. So I think that sort of inflated the market because everybody who came in didn't invest heavily in coaching staff. They didn't invest in infrastructure. They didn't invest in anything other than to just say, look, instead of buying a team, I can just give these guys a humongous salary and then I'll bring them over to my side and then I'll have all the spots. Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of that works for the players. It doesn't really work doesn't really build any value for sort of the infrastructure around esports in general.
Yeah.
And if there's 100 people waiting to invest into this and do it that way, it's sustainable. But as soon as there's not people ready to invest in, then the whole thing crashes because all the salaries are then 4x what they should have been. So I think esport now is I've always called it sort of the big correction. I think over the next couple of years, we're really going to see who's actually here and knows what they're doing and are building something sustainable, and who were just here massively overpaid, oversold this whole thing to their venture fund partners, and then sort of hope to catch up. And I think, we're already seeing that with some teams sort of turning the key, where COVID-19 is sort of the accelerator of that decision.
Yeah. Well, I guess Optic would be a prime example of that, right? Sold into a conglomerate. Now it's back with the man who started it all.
Who actually knows how to build a sustainable business. Yeah,
and it's done very, led the industry, especially as far as content creation and fan generation has gone. That's for sure. Besides FaZe, they'd be equal number one or number two. Yeah. And I had another point to add into there, but I completely forgot what it was. So while I try to remember what that is, it was about the players and the way that teams were generated. I think people from the outside probably won't understand that how much of a boys' club, even now or up until now, like a lot of these teams have been. It's one player will only join a team if his mate comes as well, whether his mate is actually good or not. They're the ones that come together. There's groups of 4 that may bully the 5th. And, even I had that trouble back in 2013 when I was a semi-pro. We were playing 30 hours a week while all of us were working full time. We're taking a really serious run, wanting to end up becoming, overseas players, but unfortunately got dominated by Vox Eminor that became Renegades. But, we had a lot of trouble always finding a 5th. We could find 4 guys that work together. But, that 5th, it's hard when you've got an odd number because generally you pair up. And there's 2 mates that hold a bomb site together. They're good friends and they want to go team to team to team. But then when you try to find that 5th person, sometimes it's the odd one out. I'd be interested to learn from you. Australis has kept pretty much the same lineup for, forever. So I'd be interested in learning from you, like what's your recruitment process as far as that stuff goes? What's your retention like with these players? How do you make sure that they stay around and don't float from team to team? Because even professional teams these days, you see that players will go from Cloud9 to FaZe and back, etc.
I think sort of the power of the players is a blessing and a curse for them. The way teams were built historically was basically, I like this guy and I don't like this guy. Kindergarten playground rules. Yeah. As soon as I'm afraid that you maybe not like me, I'll scheme with the other 3 to get you kicked out. Yeah. And I think there was no accountability. There was no system for sort of how do you deal with issues, how do you deal with stuff. And I think that sort of led to the easy decision was, this is the odd man out. Let's kick him and just we'll say that he was the cause of all our problems. I think what Kasper Witt, our sports director, managed to build and big cadeau to the players for buying into it is he built a system and a framework for sort of clearing these things out. And I think once you put players in a situation where, they don't have to think about anything other than playing. They don't have to think about, can I say this to this guy? Is he then going to get mad? Is he then going to get me kicked? And la, 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 la. I can predict a lot of the big tournaments, how a team is going to play just depending on how they look at each other and how they talk to each other when they arrive at the hotel. It's easy to see if this is going to work or if this is not going to work. And this is the same way that Kasper has a rule that he doesn't need to watch their practice. He just listens to their practice because by that he can tell everything. Everything he needs to know is there. So I think for that, it really is, you need to have a system where the players don't make the changes because then they're going to be thinking about those changes instead of thinking about where to be on the server. And I think, that is what we're trying to build. But then obviously there will come a time where we will need to change one of those players. And then the question comes, have we actually built the system to do it or not to do it? And I think that's what we're trying to sort of find out now and build the right way. That's why we have EasyTech sitting on the bench, or had EasyTech sitting on the bench, now have Boopski. So we want to have that flexibility and we want to create an environment where the end goal is the performance, not the paycheck, not keeping your friends on the team because you want him to keep getting paid. So it's an interesting dynamic. And I think, it's something that's going to find its own system over the next, couple of years. But again, it is an ongoing issue in esports that you sort of have to adjust the power dynamics to what actually makes sense. And we don't have the perfect plan. Like nobody really has the perfect plan. I think it's going to be something that we're going to have to find among teams, coaches, and players.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's something that's always going to exist in some form or another, because if you've got an NFL team, they've got a starting roster of 40, 50, something like that. There's no way that all those guys are going to be mates. And that's good because, they can get put into that system of let's just pick who's best to play with. And it's the same as being in the military. You got to trust the guy on your left and the guy on your right, but that's it when you're playing that kind of linebacker style game. But when it's Counter-Strike and you're, traveling to these guys, especially, 3 to 5 years ago, you're sleeping 3 people to a single hotel room. You're playing with the same players for 30, 50, 60 hours a week on week, not having any breaks. Like it's impossible not to become invested in your teammates and not to have people start to argue the same way that best mates will live together, move out of home, live together and start arguing.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be a problem. And you could even see it in the NBA these days. If an upcoming big free agent has an agent, his other clients are going to get signed too expensively because people want to be friends with the agent. So I think it's always going to happen in sports, but I think we'll eventually find the right solution for this. And I think it is. At the end of the day, the performance and the product is the most important thing because that is what the fans love. I think, that's we need to find a solution to that, but we'll get there. I'm not too worried about that.
There was a good question in the LinkedIn live chat actually from Ardian, and I think you've already pre-answered maybe all of it or most of it about how you guys get the players to buy in. But his question was around what organizational advantages do Australis have over other teams? So if you take out the players as a whole, like what advantage does the operational and the overarching structure have from Australis versus other teams?
I think ultimately there's a couple of things. One thing is we have a very, very well mixed sort of leadership group. So, we have people from really sort of pro serious entertainment and sports. People who run big football clubs, big stadiums, all these different things. We have people like my partner Nikolai, who comes from a tech background. Like he understands how to scale businesses, how to create products, great strategic mind. You have someone like me who slept under the table and drank cocoa back in the days, which is like there's an internal Danish joke. It's like a cocoa milk. We used to, it's a lingo here that's what the gamers drink. Yeah. So, and then we have Kasper, who was actually sort of the team captain of the Danish national team in handball and a Danish icon sort of a sport. So you have all these different people who can each bring their perspective. And I think what you see in a lot of other esports teams is you see an either or. Either you have someone who's completely from the outside who wants to run it like it is from the outside, or you have someone who's completely on the inside and isn't maybe ready to cede some of the control to the people from the outside. So I think we have quite a good mix there. And then I think the other thing that we always sort of pride ourselves on is that we always look at this long term. Like we are in a financial situation and we are in a way that we're building this. We're not going to make sort of hastily decisions that's going to fix things for us in the next month. We think long term. So if we need to pluck out 2 players of the lineup to give them the break that they need, we do not care about losing the next couple of tournaments. That's fine because we believe that we want to win longer term. So I think, one of the difference between, I think a lot of other teams go into 21 and saying, oh yeah, we would like to win a major. That's not how we work. Kasper says, okay, I would like to win 3 majors over the next 5 years. And then we plan for that instead. So if we lose the next upcoming major, it's actually not a problem because we have 4 more tries. And that sort of creates a different perspective on things where some other teams will not win the major and they'll start yelling at each other and be like, oh, we didn't do the blah, 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 blah. We sort of always keep the long perspective on things and we want to build something sustainable and right and not just sort of what is right in front of our noses.
Something I never thought about before, but I just thought about then when you were talking about it is, does it become like a physical sports tournament then where you're aiming as a team to peak for a tournament? Because in the past, CSGO has been go, 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 go. It's just flying from one tournament to the next. You fly from IEM in Sydney, then you fly over to Germany and then you fly from there to Brazil and it's nonstop playing. You're just trying to win all the time. Does it become more like if you're a fighter in the UFC, you know that you've got to fight in 12 weeks. You know that that's when your diet has to be dialed in. You train much harder than ever before. But your body can't sustain that forever. So that's why you only fight maximum 3-4 times a year, sans injuries or something like that. Is that?
I agree. But I think it's also, this comes back to sort of the lineup issue, right? If you believe that if you don't win the next tournament, someone is going to get kicked, then you can take a break, because the system doesn't allow you to do that. But we want to create that system. I mean, I remember Casper had a conversation with the players after we won the first major and then didn't win the next one. And they're like, yeah, everybody's saying the era is over. He's like, Nadal won his first tennis tournament when he was 19, like his first Grand Slam. He didn't win another one for, I think, like 3 or 4 years. Do you think people told a 20-year-old Nadal that his era was over? Of course they didn't tell him it was over. Like, our era is 10 years. And I think that is sort of the legacy that we want to build. In our side, we're only halfway, if even halfway, through the Australis era. Because we want to have continual dominance over a 10-year period and not just 6 months or 9 months.
Yeah, I feel like after seeing some success in my own business, I can definitely see some likeness between that. So you see this with esports teams a lot, or even, my company when we were smaller and struggling a bit, which is you're desperate for the win the same way that you're desperate for the sell. And you see some esports companies, all they want to do is they want to get the brand across the line, and they want to get that 100K in, because they know that 100K is going to get them an extra 3 months and it's going to keep them alive. But they're actually focused on whether it's good or not. And it makes sense that, the winning does come when the team has that stress taken off them. It's not I need to make this sale in this meeting, otherwise I'm going to get fired and my company's going to die. It's okay if we don't win this. It's okay if we come 3rd, 5th or 6th, because we know that we're going to peak for the next tournament and be a bit more relaxed as we go through the year.
Exactly. I think what you'll see with our teams is, and what we hope to achieve, is that our highest level might not be the highest of all teams. I would argue that it probably is in Counter-Strike at least, but our lowest level has to be higher than everyone else's. So at some point during a tournament, most other teams will have at least one bad game, and that's where they lose. They could have maybe won the tournament, but they had that one bad day. We don't have bad days. So we always sort of, one of the first things you have to learn as a professional athlete is the day where you wake up feeling bad and everything is a little bit off, that's not an excuse. You still have to perform. You still have to find a way to sort of forget that and perform. And I think that's what we've been quite good at.
And I guess it builds on the business side. It obviously builds some safety into you with those 3-year contracts that you talked about before. So, I've been helping to broker a deal at the moment between a headset brand, a global headset brand, and an Australian esports team. And it was interesting to me that the brand brought up that as well. They're looking at 24-month partnerships, because up until even 2020, it's still not even common for these esports teams a lot of the time. But is that also part of it, that you don't feel the pressure that you need to sign on a brand and instantly win a tournament for them to be happy and stay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's also, if your main product is winning the games, you're going to have a hard time. Like, that's just how it is. Nobody can win everything all the time. So I think for us, I always usually say it like this, for a lot of other teams that I've talked to, when I know they talk to partners, is the hero piece of the activation is the logo on the jersey. And the logo on the jersey only gets exposure if you win. So, you're betting on winning. Whereas for us, sort of the logo on the jersey is a hygiene product. That's just what needs to be there to remind people of the partnership. But what you want to do is you want to identify that, the fandom of a team is a passion point. And a passion point can be anything. It can be football, it can be influencers, it can be, YouTubers, it can be cars, whatever, it can be wine, whatever your passion point is. If you can find a way to communicate to people through their passion point and have it relatable to that passion, then you have something that's worth something. So for us, the important part is, how do we activate? What kind of story are we telling with our players? And then the logo on the jersey should just be a reminder of that story. When you look at the Logitech, logo on an Australis jersey, you shouldn't think, Logitech paid them a lot of money. You should think about, there's this really cool thing that Logitech and Australis did together that I remember because it meant something to me. So yeah, I think that's sort of how you want to switch it. Because then, if you do a great story and you do great distribution on it, then winning the tournament just becomes the cherry on top of the sundae. It can never be the sundae, because then you will never have a sustainable business.
So does that explain more then as to what you're looking for in a commercial partner? Are you looking for one that understands it's about the content and the story? Like, are they active in joining you on this journey generally, or are they just, a bit more passive and they're relying on you to do that activation for them?
It varies so much. I mean, and I think, for us, we don't need them to be super passionate and want to know everything about esports. We know everything about esports. That's what you pay us for. So that's fine. But the one thing that we do demand is that you need to trust us. Historically, the worst partners I've always worked with is the people who say, we're currently this, but we really want to be this. And then I come and say, okay, so how about we do something that fits over here? And then they're like, nah, and then they slowly move the bar, and then actually we just want to do this. And then I'm like, then I can help you because that doesn't work in our sort of environment and doesn't work with our brand. So, the best partnerships that we've had has been the ones where the partner either has a very clear knowledge of the space and what they want to do. Obviously, again, someone like Logitech, someone like HP Omen, they know what they want to do. They know the space. They have a lot of teams. Whereas someone like, Audi out of Ingolstadt, Bang & Olufsen, who's a luxury headset, sound brand, TV brand, they don't know what they're doing here. But what they can say to us is this is who we are. This is how we work. This is what we want to do. And then we will find that connection into the passion point. And then we will tell that story. So we're more than happy to work with brands who have no clue about the space. But what they need to do is they need to have a clue of who they are, and they need to have the trust in us to execute on it.
There was a good question in the Twitch chat actually from a guy called, I believe it's Ninja Lowered, but and I'll rephrase a little bit as to how they asked it. But where are your gaps right now in commercial? So obviously you've got most things wrapped up. Are you guys still looking for new commercial brands to slap on? Is there a fatigue limit where there's going to be too many brands that you're trying to represent?
At some point there's a limit. Like, we don't want to work with everyone all the time, all over the place. I think what you're going to see from us in the future is we're going to be expanding sort of our inventory a little bit in a way that isn't usually something that you would do. Okay. So for the fan who has been following a lot, they would notice that there's now something called Australis Denmark on YouTube, for example. So there's a Danish YouTube channel as well. Which has seen significant growth. So now all of a sudden we have a lot of regional partners as well, actually. We have I don't know if you noticed, but we just launched our own Visa card together with a bank. Yeah. So you can now have an Australis Visa card. You can go into a 7-Eleven and buy your Australis energy drink as well. So we just need a car and a couple of more things, and then we have a full set. But no, we'll create ecosystems upon which we can activate these partners directly to the people that they want to talk to. Because, every single partner I talk to, there's always a calculation of, if I tweet about them, usually it's only between 25 to 45% of the people I'm reaching is actually relevant for this partner. Rest of them is irrelevant because their product is not there, or they don't have a license in that market, or someone else is running that market. So, we're building the ecosystems, and I think, we're scaling it all the time. And again, because the jersey is not the primary product, we're not going to run out of jersey space, because we also have a lot of partners. I mean, Bang & Olufsen is not on our jersey. Luna, the bank, is not on our jersey. So we want to create the matching inventory, and we want to be able to activate it. So yeah, there's still a lot of things that we can do. And then we have a lot of things in the pipeline that are really, really cool. So yeah, there's more room to grow, but obviously, at some point we're going to run out of sort of the big iconic global deals that has a logo on the jersey.
There was a good question in the LinkedIn chat as well from Chris Kizak that leads well into this, actually, which is, do you see, with that creation of the Danish thing, and also you mentioned, or the Danish YouTube channel, and also you mentioned influencers as well, do you see you guys diversifying or straying a little bit away from esports and going to maybe some more casual games? So his comment is that a whole bunch of different esports companies are creating like Cyberpunk 2077 content at the moment, which couldn't be further from competitive Dota 2, League of Legends, CSGO, the hardcore tier 1 games, which obviously you guys are known for.
I will never say never, but I think I still believe that even the best content creators are still sort of struggling with monetization of it. And I think that is sort of a pinch that we haven't really seen the solution to. I have this theory that for something to be really, really, really relevant and be super exciting to work with, it sort of has to have three things in it. It needs to be live, it needs to be competitive, and it needs to be culturally relevant. Like if you can tick those three boxes, you have something very, very unique. And I think especially in a time where a lot of things are moving to VOD content, where people can skip the advertisement, or they can use an ad block, or there's no advertisement because it's a streaming service, the live content just has a unique value. Like there's very few can't miss moments anymore on TV and in entertainment in general. Live sports has a lot of them, and in any live sort of competitive entertainment format. So I think that's more what we're focused on. For us, the commercialization of it is more important, to be honest. I think, you'll probably more see us move towards something that has significant media rights deals attached to it, or has a league spot in something, or owns a part of something that we can scale upon, more than just adding a lot of content. Because I think, could we create a good, decent business around some influencers? Probably. Do we want to be an influencer agency who just takes money and passes it on and take a little cut? Not really at this moment, no. Because I think what you want to have is you want to have a product where you can scale what you deliver more than the actual product itself. Because if I give you 1x and you pay me 1y, when I say, yeah, now I want 2y, then you say, yeah, I want 2x. But if you can scale delivery, that's better, because delivery doesn't mean more Twitter posts and more live events and more anything else. You just need to do the greatest Twitter posts and the greatest live events. And I think that the business sort of on the influencer side, I still haven't really sort of found the golden nugget there, to be honest. But we're definitely looking at a lot of different ways to do things for the future.
That comment about live definitely got me thinking. It's not something I've heard people talk about before, but it does make sense. How much is a live activation or a live meetup in person worth versus a 30-second ad roll on an influencer's channel that you can potentially skip through? And what's
look, you're going to grab a cup of coffee, you're going to go to the bathroom, you're going to look the other way. I mean, this is why when we did Blast, the most effective advertisement spots that we had was actually running during the game. Because people doesn't look away during the round. But if you can find a way where you implement it without taking anything away from sort of the viewership experience of it, that's where you're going to get, 95% attention on it. And that's right at the sweet spot.
And I guess part of the other way I'd explain is that you guys are at all times chasing the highest CPM as possible. That's what it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, of course. But I think at the end of the day, we are not a CPM company. We are a company that creates an emotional connection. We want to be the ones that gives you something that you remember. So let's say that we do something with Audi, and then one of our friends a year later needs to buy a car, and he thinks to himself, of course it has to be an Audi, because I remember that positive sort of association that there is with that brand. And I think, if we go over to becoming too much of a CPM brand, we're going to be competing with Facebook ads. You're never going to have a chance against Facebook ads. So a lot of people usually say that, content is king. I don't agree with that. For me, it's actually context is king, because we provide context. We can do measurement that tells you that if you do an internet ad here in Denmark, you're going to get certain amount of attention on it and certain amount of conversion. But if you do an internet ad that has our player standing in it, people are going to look a lot more, and they're going to pay more attention to your promotion. So that's sort of what we want to be able to do.
And it makes sense, drawing back to like what you said about not having a lot of interest in being an influencer agency at this stage, where, influencer agencies are cash flow rich but asset poor. So, you're making a low margin a lot of the times, 15% off your brand deals, or, after your costs, you probably EBITDA's down to 8% a lot of the time, or 7%. And what do you own? You really own the contracts of the influencers. And if anyone's listened to some of my content, say with Fusion Droid I did recently, 2 million subscribers on YouTube, he makes 95% of his money from direct ad revenue, not from sponsorship. So if he's really unhappy with his agency, he could probably just stop doing ads for them, and it's not going to send him out of house and home. He's already bought a house cash this year as a 22-year-old off ad revenue. So it's not going to worry him. He's going to live out that contract and not do anything for the brand whatsoever. As where if you've got an esports player, it's very unlikely they're going to bench themselves because they want to be a champion at the same time. And you don't have that asset of anything bar the 2-year contract with those guys. So, I got a friend who's going through it at the moment. He was thinking about selling his agency, and, he's made millions of dollars in sales, but, he's being offered not a large amount for his agency. And I said, mate, it's because you don't have a brand. Your asset is your contracts with the influencers, who essentially can probably leave at any time. So that's what they're buying from you. You're not buying the LEC spot. You're not buying the ESL Pro League spot like you are, say, with your growth asset that you guys are pitching your business on.
Exactly. I think I just want to be clear. Obviously, I believe that it can be done. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the guys at Night Media, who's running Mr. Beast, etc. 100 Thieves, I think, is pushing the envelope and really working hard to find the right way, and they're really on a good path there. So I think it can be done. I just haven't really seen sort of the path for us to do it yet.
Yeah, and they're doing, and the answer I would say to that is they're doing very similar things to what you're talking about, which is ownership of companies. You're seeing Mr. Beast release his own apps. Just recently we saw that Barebone, which is like a handheld thing you can put around a mobile. That's been invested into by Click Management directly, a bunch of their largest players. I think PewDiePie is an investor in that as well. Laserbeam is one of the biggest creators in the world as a direct investor. Fresh Asian with 6 million subscribers. So you're seeing these guys are starting to launch their own brands and to do these things because they realize that, cash flow is king, but only when it's attached to something, which is also an appreciating asset at the same time. And I think some influencers of old who, have maybe reached 500,000 subscribers when YouTube was new and, they were starting to make that 10, 20, 30K in their pocket, realize that when their content dries up, they've got nothing left. And their YouTuber sitting there with 1 million followers and only 5,000 views per video. And they go, okay, now what? I've run out of money. I can't buy any more Gucci. What do I do? And they can't do anything. You can't sell that channel. I got a mate who's a YouTuber who wants to sell his channel at the moment. I'm saying, mate, the channel is attached to you. Like, I'm not sure who's going to buy it. Like,
exactly.
So for a bit of a change of topic, something that we had a bit of a laugh about before we started is, your leading commercial at Australis. What does your commercial team look like? Is it just you? Do you have some sales agents that sit under you?
Yeah, so we have sort of different departments. Obviously we do commercial activation across the company. It isn't just the commercial department that runs it. So we sort of getting nitty gritty. We have 4 different departments. We have digital, which is basically distribution, which is, when do we post it? How do we post it? How do we write copy? Where does it need to be? Blah, 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 blah. Then we have production, which is basically creative. That creates all the assets. There's designers, there's editors, there's photographers, there's all these different people who can sort of create. This is basically a factory creating sort of anything that we need to have created. Then we have what we call partnerships management, which is basically the ones who are account managers, talking directly to the client, acting as the interface towards the rest of the company. And then we have one sales guy in my sales team so far. So all that we've done has actually just been two people. But yeah, it's still small, and we're sort of scaling it up. We're adding licensing, we're adding different sort of aspects to that business. But I think if you look at us, you should probably think of us more as a media agency in that regards and how we're built. With strong internal resources, especially in production and digital, to be able to execute this. Because again, running partnerships like the ones that we're running requires a lot of production and requires a lot of creativity. And again, you can't sit there and say that we're the guys who know esports and how to do things if you don't actually know esports and how to do things. So it's a big priority for us, and it's something that we're scaling.
I found every hire I've made in the esports and gaming market to be hard. But even more so, we're trying to hire for sales and BDM at the moment, and it feels like an almost impossible task. Like, where, have you found much sales prowess in the esports space? Has there been many people that have blown you away? Because obviously, like you said, you've done it with mainly with you, and then someone else you've tacked on at the later years.
I think it's the hard part about salespeople is a lot of people sort of expect them. Now I'm one myself. I never actually intended to be one, but I just became one. It takes time. You need to give people the time to sort of feel the market out, learn about the product, learn how to present it. I mean, like the guy that we have now, we hired him right around a year ago. And to be honest, like, he hasn't been able to fully function until like 6 months ago. And COVID did not make that easier, because he needs to meet a lot of people. He needs to be in all my pitches. He needs to hear me speak about this product. And I think, the other thing is you're talking to potential clients who does not understand what this is. They don't have any sort of reference frame for what they think it is. Like, if I go to a partner and say, oh, do you want to be a sponsor of a Superliga club, which is like the best football league in Denmark? They have a pretty good idea of what should this cost? What should I get? How many tickets? How many dinners? How many advertisements on the sideboards of the pitch, etc. Where here's like, what is this thing and what can it actually do? And I think, that it takes a special kind of person. And I think a lot of people who are coming from normal sports and other places who sort of sees the space and think, oh, I want to be in this space, they cannot find that sort of solution. I think, it's an emotional product. I mean, like I always said, like I've been in meetings where I pitched someone and I said, okay, this is 100,000 euros a year. And they look at me going like, you're crazy. I'm never going to pay you that. And I've been in meetings where I said, yeah, this is 1.5 million euros a year. And like, yeah, okay, that probably makes sense. So I think, how do you contextualize the sale and what can you actually deliver and how can you create a track record of what you've done before is a big task. But yeah, finding good salespeople is a very, very hard task in any sort of industry, I think, to be honest, sadly.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. One interesting thing for me too, with my time at Corsair is wondering how these traditional esports sponsorship brands are going to be able to keep up with those mainstream dollars. When you start getting more, obviously you guys have Audi, but when we start getting more of these non-endemic brands coming into the space, I feel like, in the past, companies like Corsair have been used to getting that front of jersey sponsorship, but they're just simply not going to have the budget to be able to battle against a Coca-Cola or something like that. Do you find those conversations or those thoughts happening for you too?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're reaching the point where sort of the endemic partnerships have reached their limits. But I think, you can never underestimate the value that the endemic partners actually bring to the table. Because, with us, we sort of had to go through the drill as well, that we were very focused originally on sort of, sort of bridging into the mainstream and breaking into the mainstream and sort of showcasing that. But actually, when Audi comes to us, they're not looking to break into the mainstream. They are the mainstream. They want to break into esports. So, if I get a big article in Bild, in one of the biggest German newspapers where I get Audi signed, my endemic partners would love that. Audi would say, look, I'm already in Bild all the time. I have like 4 set ads every single week. Why should I care about this? I'm not paying you to get me in Bild. I pay other people to get me in Bild. I pay you to get me on sort of Reddit and HLTV and all these different places. So I think, someone like Logitech, for example, brings a lot of value to our other partners, because Audi and Logitech can sort of sit down together and Audi can say, okay, so what is actually the 15 years of experience, 20 years of experience you have in this space? What has it taught you, and what can you help us? How can you help us execute on this? So I think, even though you're going to see the paychecks from the endemic partners become relatively smaller compared to the mainstream ones, please don't underestimate the power of them, because you need them, because they have a gigantic base to talk into this space, and they'll bring so much value to your other partners. So yeah, I think what they have to do is, I think actually someone like, now I'm probably not on selling my own product, but they need to be more demanding, and they say, look, we also bring a lot of value to this partnership, and we can help you other partners, so we shouldn't pay as much as them. And I think that is completely fair.
Yeah, I was laughing when you were talking about, how Audi wouldn't care if you get into the mainstream. And I was laughing with my Corsair and Thermaltake hat on, because I remember at one stage, thinking like 2014 to 2018, it was every mainstream company's plan that they would get that lovely dollar from a Logitech, from a Corsair, to take them into the mainstream, without understanding that, at that stage, especially, like, Corsair was primarily focused on computer cases and coolers and power supplies. Like, I always had that conversation, like, why the hell do you think I care about a billboard? How many people walking past this billboard are going to buy like a super expensive, nice looking RGB lit computer case? Like, it's not going to happen. So, and I don't have the budget to pay for things like that. So it made perfect sense to, spend more of those dollars in that gaming and esports market. And the same that you were saying with those brands coming into that space too. Those Audis and things. Why do you think car brands have come so hard into the market? Because besides fast food and besides energy drinks, car brands, I would think, are probably the number one category out of any other sponsor to come into the esports market by far. You've got Honda, Audi, Mercedes, BMW, Toyota, Subaru came in a little bit a while ago, et cetera, et cetera. They're all so hardcore into the space.
I think honestly, the target audience that they would like to have is the target audience that we have. The target audience that they actually have is a target audience that that is very valuable, but they don't necessarily see a future in. So, some of the big German car brands, if you did a survey, you would see that the usual buyer of an Audi, Mercedes, BMW, or Volkswagen, I think Volkswagen skews a little younger, but at least the 3 other big ones, is typically male and above 50 years old.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense.
That's a valuable audience to be in. I mean, golf companies will tell you that that's a valuable audience, but it's not a sustainable audience. So I think what they're looking at here, they're seeing, okay, look, we have a relatively young audience, typically skews heavy between 15 and 39. It skews heavily male. It skews heavily tech focused and interested. And they usually like a little bit of action. Like, they see all the common denominators of people who love cars. So I think for them, this is a no-brainer, and it makes a lot of sense for them. So this is exactly the people that they want to talk to. This is the people that they see as, lifetime Audi drivers or BMW drivers or Mercedes drivers, who are probably also going to get jobs that pay quite well. So, these are the people, I think from a target audience perspective, they're never going to hit anything better than this.
Yeah, no, that would definitely make sense. And I've always wondered, if that's, always thought that's why BMW has gotten so hardcore globally into the esports market, because I feel like they've lost they've lost the street cred that Mercedes AMG have. How often do you see rappers driving or talking or influencers driving a BMW? I feel like a BMW has almost, for better or for worse, become a kind of a lawyer's / real estate agent's car, whereas, there's nothing cooler than an AMG, and also, an RS4 or an RS6 or something like that as well. So, maybe that's why BMW is so hardcore into League of Legends.
Yeah, but I think you also have to remember that one of the boundaries that these companies have had is, their marketing budgets are so massive that at €100,000 deal, it just doesn't make sense for them. It's not worth the hassle, to be honest, like not on a global scale, at least. So that's why you see BMW grab so many assets in one. This is, then again, we're speaking, less than 0.2% of their marketing budget globally. Like it barely makes a dent. So I think for them, it's a no-brainer. For them, it's always been a question of, do I dare to put my logo on it? Like, do I dare to be associated with this? Because the potential downside of a crisis or something going wrong is always, 100 times worse than what they're spending on it and what they could potentially gain from it. So I think that is the process that they've gone through, and now they've sort of gone a little bit wide and take multiple angles. So I think BMW did quite a well job with United and Rivalry. I think we're still seeing sort of that lacking that sort of more globally bringing things together activation of it, but I think they have at least given the teams quite good toolboxes to work with from a day-to-day perspective.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, that would explain why they got into League. That's why they got into 5 teams pretty much at once. And that's always a discussion I've had with people who work in traditional media here in Australia, and they tell me the same thing. They say, look, the reason why a blue chip large brand isn't interested is because they can't easily place 10, 15 million US dollars in one hit with just one agency that can just go out and handle it. Because if you want to do that, you need to go and talk to 5 separate teams yourself. You need to go to talk to 6 different influencer agencies yourself. And some of these influencer agencies, for better or for worse, are managed by a 19-year-old. Can you trust them? Do you really want to put your brand behind that? Do you want some of the scandals to come out? Do you want to, the Department of Defense was sponsoring some YouTubers in Australia, and then some tweets from 9 years ago surfaced. Do you want those kind of issues to happen with yourself? Probably not.
And then I think the other thing you have to remember is that these companies are used to working in traditional sports. And traditional sports, historically, most great storylines have been built on opposition. So, Okay. You don't sponsor Barcelona because as much as you gain from the Barcelona fans, as much you lose with the Real Madrid fans. So that's why they like the approach of taking multiple assets. So they say, look, we're sponsoring League of Legends in general and the best of League of Legends. We're not sponsoring just G2 because then the Fnatic fans doesn't want to buy a BMW because it's a G2 sponsor. So I think, that this is usually their mindset. They like to see sort of the positive, celebratory, wider angle of things instead of saying we are aligning with this brand uniquely.
That's you're the first person within esports to bring something like that up. I've had multiple people from traditional sports ask me about that, and every time I've brought that up with people in esports, they've either not thought about it or they don't agree. So it's really interesting to see you bring that up, because they say the same thing. They say, we don't like sponsoring teams, we like sponsoring leagues, because that exact same reason. While there might be 5 million fans of a team, there's also 5 million people who hate them and have hated them for their whole life and for generations and generations within their family. So the last thing you want to do is build friends, but also build enemies as a brand at the same time.
Exactly.
Do brands tell you that? Like, where'd you get that data from?
I think, I've been spending a lot of time sort of looking into regular sports, or whatever you want to call it, and talking to a lot of people. And I hear that a lot, I don't want to sponsor this team because then this team or these teams are going to hate me. I would rather take more of them. And I mean, we had a conversation with a global beer brand about doing something just a couple of months ago. And they said, again, look, we don't sponsor Real Madrid, we sponsor the Champions League. Like, that's what we do. We need to be across all of it, and we need everybody to sort of enjoy what we're doing. So I hear that a lot. And I think the reason why you're not hearing it more in esports is the fact that we haven't, because of the relatively short history of esports, we haven't really created those rivalries, and we haven't really played into it. I mean, like, there's not really when have you heard of 2 fan bases getting into a fight, at an event? It doesn't happen. There's no 2 fan bases that absolutely hate each other. It just doesn't exist. So I think we're not there yet. And I think, it's something also that we're trying to actively work against getting to. Because I don't think it creates anything. I mean, it was a narrative built by the media rights people who wanted to say, City and United hate each other so much, you want to watch the game on Sunday. It doesn't really help any of us in any other way. So I think it's hopefully not something that we're going to see in esports. I mean, if you sponsor Australis here in the Nordics, nobody was going to hate you for that. Some people might, be fans of someone else, but look at this, look at esport events. You'll see a family turn up where I remember in Copenhagen where the son was wearing an Australis jersey, the dad was wearing an Australis jersey, the daughter was wearing a face jersey. I think the mother was wearing a face jersey as well. So the family was sort of split in half, and they just enjoyed themselves and had a great time, and they cheered for each other's teams. I mean, there's nothing negative in it.
Hopefully there's no CSGO Virtus Pro versus Australis rights then, like you have in soccer and football.
Well, we did the Clash for Cash or whatever it was in Ely back in the day. So that they sort of tried to play it up a little bit. And I think some tournament organizers have tried to force players' hand in saying, F those guys and we'll beat them and blah, blah, blah. But come on. It doesn't.
A lot of people have asked me this question, and I don't have a great answer. So I'd love to ask you it. Are the fans following their team, or are the fans following the players, or are they following both?
I think it's a combination. I think what we're sort of seeing you have to remember that originally when sports sort of started building up, the interaction point with the players and the teams in general was the media broadcast. So the players didn't own any of their own channels. I mean, like Larry Bird didn't have a Twitter in the NBA where he could say all sorts of stuff. He could do a few interviews and he could do some TV commercials, but that was about it. Late night talk shows where he could show a little bit of personality. But now, I mean, like you have players in the NBA, at least they're building sort of media empires around their names. And I mean, like, I was actually listening to a long podcast the other day about this that was really interesting, with the situation where James Harden in the NBA now is trying to force his way out of Houston, where the experts said, look, back in the day, I mean, people would have been burning his jersey. They would have been so mad. They would have been booing him every single time he comes back to Houston if he's traded. But now we're like, oh, it's James Harden. We love James Harden. I think esport is sort of growing into a world where players very easily can have their own personalities. And I think the problem that a lot of esports teams has is the easy branding exercise is to push the players in front of you and say, look, these are the guys. Because if it goes right, and you can get some more sponsors and you have it until the players leave. And if it goes wrong, it's the player's fault. We don't have anything to do with this. So I think in esports, we're really going to see sort of the mix between players and teams. But I think you can build a team brand as long as you have a clear direction of what you want to do, what you stand for, how do you communicate, who do you want to be. And I think with Australis, we've actually been able to do that. I mean, I remember when we did the very first blast here in Copenhagen in 2017, I think it was, in Royal Arena. I was sitting with Semler and Anders after the tournament and just, having a beer. And Semler said, I have never, ever tried such a one-sided, crowd in Europe. Never. And I said, look, this is because people are actually fans of Australis. They're not just fans of Counter-Strike. They're actual fans of Australis. I think that's what we want to build. So I think, putting the players front and center is a decent strategy and it works in some regards, but I think you have to find the balance.
I think driving the actual fans thing is interesting as well. There was a quote from Clinton Sparks, X-Phase, current X-Set, that I kept reusing all the time that I use again, which is asking, a lot of esports teams need to ask themselves, are they popular or are they influential? And I would argue, I feel a lot of the time, maybe the Overwatch League teams and some of these other franchise leagues, the teams there are popular, but not influential. I think influential is, like you were saying, when a crowd is cheering for you and actively, booing, or they don't care about the other team. I think influential is FaZe doing a meetup at New York City and getting 16 city blocks of people to turn up to see them. It's not just how many Twitter followers you have. It's how many people can put bums on seats and they're wearing your jerseys while they're in there as well.
Yeah, so for us, we work with the term ambassadors. An ambassador is someone who's proud to be associated with you and want to wear a jersey. So we've sort of, in our funnel marketing, we've sort of set up different paths. Like, this is what an ambassador is. The rest is just followers. Because I think, if you look at it, the average follower on a esport fan is going to follow 14 different teams on Twitter. That doesn't mean he's a fan of 14 different teams. It just means he likes to hear what's going on. So for us, that's sort of our path is we want to build, real fans, and we want to reward the real fans for being real fans.
Yeah, I wonder if people are ever going to change, or I don't know if grow out of it is the right word or not. But, like you were saying before, people don't seem to hate other teams. It seems like a lot of the time that if you're a fan of a game, you're often a fan of esports as a whole, or if not, you're just a fan of the game as a whole. But you don't see that within soccer or football. You don't see people equally follow, the leagues in Brazil the same they will the EPL, the same they will, the A-League in Australia. They'll primarily just follow their one team and where they play. But often, people will be using platforms like Duke.gg because they just want a hit of Counter-Strike. And all they want is good teams to be playing, and that's all they care about. They're a fan of CS, and sometimes they might even watch a bit of Overwatch.
Yeah, because that's what we're missing sometimes, right? Like you don't have an association by city where if you live in Copenhagen, you're an Astralis fan because it's Copenhagen Astralis or whatever it is. And you don't have what I would call environmental exposure, which is, you have Liverpool fans who were sitting on their dad's knee when they were 5 watching Liverpool games. So of course they're also a Liverpool fan. I think we don't really have that historically. I think we'll start seeing that now. I mean, we just started selling sort of baby gear with Australis logos, and given the amount of stuff that we've sold of that, there's going to be a lot of Australis fans in 15, 18 years time because they've been exposed to it very early on. Yeah. But I think that's just going to come with time. I mean, to be honest, it's going to come with, we also speak about, first generation Australis fans, people who didn't know who we are until they saw us on national TV here. Like they don't have all the reference points that we do into sort of our history. So, it is what it is. And I think, it's going to grow. And I think what we really want to make sure that we see is that this is not just a fad, this is not just, this is what we did. Remember 2019 and 2020, we did the Counter-Strike thing, and now we're doing something else. We want it to be a lifelong thing in the same way that people are football fans or basketball fans.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess that really plays to what you're saying, which is a long-term growth for you guys. You don't want to buy teams in 20 different games like some other, VC-funded esports orgs do. You want to know what you do well and do it well. And I guess your personal movements, pay testament to that too, separating from the esports tournament and going, no, teams is where I want to be, primarily with my one baby, which is the CSGO, but also with some other high-quality esports as well, like League of Legends.
Yeah, but for the games where we're really looking at it, we're looking at legacy. And then we're looking at what I call the sort of the detachment of viewership, which means that what we don't want to see is we don't want to see player base and viewership base be pretty much similar. That's sort of what we've seen historically in Overwatch, which is that's not a good sign for us, because that means as soon as the next cool FPS games comes out like Valorant, player base dips, viewer base dips. With what you see in Counter-Strike is, Apex Legends come out and player base dips, but viewership base keeps the same. So that means like I don't really care what I'm playing, but I'm watching Counter-Strike. Like and that's what we want to see, because we see that in League of Legends and we see that in FIFA as well. Is even though I don't play anymore, I'll watch it because I like the game. And I think that's what you want to see ultimately. And I think can someone like Fortnite get there? Maybe. But it's not there yet. It doesn't have the media product. And then obviously competitive integrity is important to us. And, when people ask me, the question I get the most is probably, why are we not in Fortnite? Because that's what everybody hears their kids talking about when I talk to potential partners and then I'm at the panels. And I always look, we want to put ourselves in a situation to win. We want our model to be effective. And our model is not effective if our player jumps out the plane and lands on a frying pan and the other player lands on a bazooka. Like you can have the best mental fortitude in the world and you can have the best sleep and the best way to eat and be prepared. That doesn't help you against the bazooka. So, it's great entertainment, but I wouldn't say it's competitive in the right manner that it should be.
So, talking about that, setting out that legacy then, how's the League of Legends team going versus the CSGO team? Like obviously your expectations are to set up that same legacy in that game as well.
Yeah, I think it's been sort of, quite a learning experience for us. It's actually been a lot of the things that we said when we started we didn't want to do, because I think we made a lot of sort of the rookie mistakes that we sort of see other people make, which is we had too many chefs in the kitchen. We weren't creating the right accountability system. And I think honestly, it also speaks a lot to how the league was originally founded. Because of the delay of the dispersion of the franchise spots, we were accepted officially into the LEC, I think it was about like 3 weeks before free agency in the very first year. So we were scrambling. And I think the big mistake that a lot of teams does is they build from down up. So they find the players first, and then they find a coach, and then they build upwards. What does it need to see? But what we've done now is we've basically just cleaned the slate, and now we're building downwards. So we go to Casper and say, look, this is your responsibility. How do you want to build this team? And then he'll start building from top down. Okay, so the first thing we hired was what we call our performance manager, which is the leader of everything in the team. And then we hire our team manager, then we hire our coach, and then we hire our assistant coach. Then we set the way that we want to play and how do we want to do things, and then we find the players. Because I think the other way around is the problem. We had great players, but we had the typical fallacy of all esports teams. We were massively inconsistent. And I would rather start lower and then grow incrementally, but really build systems and trust that actually works, than just be flying all over the place and then being second and then being eighth and then being third and then being 10th. Like that's just not who we are, and that's not something that we can stand by. So I think this year you're going to see the first sort of real Australis model built League of Legends team. And I think it's going to be a positive thing for a lot of people. We're not going to win the whole thing, that's for sure. But what you want to see is you want to see the growth, and you want to see the sort of the getting better every single week instead of just being all over the place.
Yeah, I really feel like that's the new, if I was to say, it kind of sounds wanky when I think about it, saying it out loud, but the new age thinking of how to build an esports team. I talked to Talent Esports and they're the same. They said the first thing we do is we go and find the best coach. We do grueling long interviews and find the best coach we possibly can. And then we give him a budget and we say, look, it's your job. Here's what we expect out of you. Here's your budget. Go and find your players. And he does his own real life football manager 2020, 2021. He does his own League of Legends manager and he finds his best players and they trust him. But he's, it's put on his shoulders. It's no longer like we talked about ages ago with, it's just a kind of a boys club of, you've got to pick up a team of 5 and that 2 of them aren't really that great, but that the other 3 won't come if those 2 don't, then you just really hope they do well. It's not like that at all. You're building a machine.
And this is back to the sort of the fallacy of esports, and it's easy to say because like we are in a financial situation where we can think long term, so it's easy to say that everybody should think long term. I think just look at the NIP Counter-Strike roster. They were clearly dysfunctional for a very, very long time, but making the decision to cut someone like GetRight is a tough decision. It's going to cost you sponsors. It's going to cost you jersey sales. It's going to cost you mousepad sales. But once they finally got around and actually did it and cleaned the slate and built a team the way that they wanted to do, they're doing as good, if not better, on a budget that's maybe a fourth of what they used to pay. So, really kudos to what they've been able to pull off there. But I think having the guts to make that decision is what we've always prided ourselves in separating us. So when we were sitting down this offseason, we were like, okay, look, the answer is pretty clear. This is what we've always said that we would do, because this is what I always said about our partners. I've been saying it for 4 years now and it hasn't happened yet, so that's a good one. But I said, well, it's going to happen this summer. I always said, look, at some point this Counter-Strike roster is not going to win everything. And what I can guarantee you is that we will not be afraid to take 5 steps back in order to take 8 forward. Like we'll rather do that instantly and just rip the Band-Aid off than just being slowly decaying with the same roster down the line. And I think giving Lucas and Andreas the breaks that they needed, that was sort of just rip off the Band-Aid. Done. You're not playing for 3 months. Get out of here. Relax. And then we were 15 in the world, and now we're back to number 2 and a close contenders number 1. If there were physical events, we would be number 1. I can say that much. So we did the same in League of Legends, and I'm really excited to see sort of how it pans out. I mean, obviously you never know, but when I look into the room where the coaches and the analysts and everyone is sitting, I feel an enormous sense of pride, to be honest. What they have done and the system that they've built is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in esports.
Yeah, it's cool to hear about the long-term thinking. And I guess if there was a game that was anything but long-term thinking in the past was CSGO, and in the present is probably Fortnite. So it's good to see you guys going with that. And I guess adding to the Fortnite thing as well, like you were saying, it's Epic Games has made it very, very clear they don't care at all about esports teams. And I think that's a big part of it too. You don't have that asset like you were saying. How many promos did Epic cut together for the Fortnite World Cup for teams? That unless you already have a strong name in content like FaZe, it's really hard to play into that market. How many people know what Team Booger plays for? I forget what the team he plays for most of the time, and he's the kid that won it, and he's the kid that got millions of followers simply from one tournament. But still, who's he attached to? I don't know.
Yeah, but the problem is that Fortnite, sort of from a viewership experience, is very similar to golf. You're dropped on this field, you're there by yourself, and Epic sort of I give them kudos for recognizing this. If they really want to get great viewership, they're going to get it through the individual streams of the players. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to hover everything all over the place. You can never catch all the action. How are you going to do that? I think, like when we spoke about Fortnite originally, it was like they cannot solve the commercial product, and I think going individual stream is actually really, really cool. I love the fact that they've done that. So I think it is just a game that is meant to build individuals. So yeah, you could have a golf team, but Nobody would really care about the team. They would care about the players.
I like that explanation. I can't believe I've never thought of that before. That's perfect. I'm waiting out for the first ever golf organization then.
Yeah, I haven't seen one yet.
No, maybe it'll come out. And I guess that's pretty similar. It is like golf, following those people around. I do remember watching like the first ever PUBG tournament. And, at least Fortnite's fixed some of those problems where, you switch between one player to another and it takes 10 seconds to draw the map around the person because the game's so graphically, intensive and things like that too. So thankfully we're past those days, and we're past, I was a Battlefield 2 competitive player. That was my first game, and I went into Bad Company 2 hoping it would be an esport, and very similar. That was a game that was very not an esport because to shoutcast you need to sit up on a cliff, join a team side as a sniper, and zoom in with binoculars, and that's how you would commentate a game. So thankfully we're out of those days. Yeah. So what's the focus for you right now? Like where are the gaps? What are you trying to fix up? What is Australis not doing well enough in your eyes that you want to do better as a whole, like as an entire company, whether it be performance, business, otherwise?
I think, I obviously can only mainly speak about sort of my side of the company. I think, my big focus point, both from sort of a commercial and a marketing perspective, is to become more than a lighthouse. And, people always talk about being a lighthouse, which is really cool. But the problem with a lighthouse is it only sort of shines its lights in one very narrow direction and everything else is darkness. So usually you will see a sort of our light will go slowly around and then, there's a game and the light is on you and then it's gone again and it's dark for quite a while. I think like for us, the challenge is now like sort of how do we become a bigger part of people's lives? Because again, I did a lot of comparison to normal sports and I think it's relevant. The curse and the blessing of being FC Copenhagen is the fact that you're FC Copenhagen. People in Copenhagen is sort of has a tendency to love you, but people who are not from Copenhagen don't care about you. Like, to be honest, like this, but you have a big stadium in the middle of Copenhagen, and you will always be there, and you will always take up space in people's minds. So how do we move Australis from being this weird thing in the cloud that you sometimes catch on TV, and if we didn't qualify for the tournament or if something else should happen, you don't see us at all. Like, how do we change that? And I think that is really one of the interesting challenges that we're working with. And we do have quite some good ideas on that. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go. Is it some sort of physical manifestation of Australis? Is it sort of the ecosystems I was talking about with a more Danish speaking sort of ecosystem that does a little bit more than just esport, that goes a little bit beyond gaming or does various different things? I think that is the challenge that I'm really trying to solve. And I think we're pretty good on our way to find the right solutions to it. But yeah, ultimately we want to create a brand that isn't just, Counter-Strike and the 5 players. Yeah, that's great. Like, we want Australis to be more. We want Australis to be a feeling. We want Australis to be an association. So when you see it on a building, whether that be Barcelona or that be Los Angeles, you're thinking, those are the guys. And I think, at the end of the day, what we really would like people to think of is sort of what we always said as our purpose, and our purpose is to champion the positive potential of gaming. Because, I'm sitting here as someone who is an adult now and who has kids, and most of my great friends I've learned through esports and through gaming. And it's been such a positive force in my life. And we believe that it is a positive force in millions and millions and millions of people's lives in so many different ways. And we want to be a part of showcasing the good that it can create instead of talking about the bad.
That's interesting. I mean, it makes sense to me. If you were to put that in other companies' perspective, if you want to make the biggest company in the world, you need to be something that, impacts people all the time or as a necessity. Every time I pick up my iPhone, I'm reminded that I have an iPhone. And when I talk about it, I have an iPhone. So I guess, you're saying that aspect that if anyone thinks gaming at all, especially esports, you want them to think Australis at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if people want to follow you online, where's the best place to do so?
I'm one of those like notoriously bad people at actually updating stuff. So I always get told by Sten Lauritsen, our head of comms, remember to use your Twitter, and then I use the Twitter for a week and then I forget about it. But I'll try to update it more. I think either LinkedIn, on where you can just Google up my name, is good, and then or Twitter at Jakob LK. That's like probably the 2 spaces you'll see me most active.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. Well, it's been really good to chat. I mean, this is the first time we've pretty much ever talked, besides a couple of emails back and forward, and you definitely taught me some stuff throughout here. I like the lighthouse idea. I like the golf idea as well, and it's cool to see the long-term thinking from you guys. I'm going to be really interested in talking to some other teams about, how they create their esports teams these days. And one thing I did forget to tell you actually is you were talking about those VC and those teams that are flush with cash that have come, and now some of them are starting to go. And there's a term people love to use in Australia, which are money orgs. That's what they call them. So the teams that come in with the money, and simply by having the money, they can afford to pay the players triple anybody else's salaries. But unfortunately, when you're spending 99% of your, total outgoing on salaries, your company doesn't last too long, and you fold and go off into the distance.
Unless you find the right partners, of course.
Yeah, unless you can find other more crazy people to give you even more money than you can spend, for sure. But it's pretty hard unless you've got a couple of million subscribers on YouTube to get that kind of cash.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So thanks, Jakob, once again, and thanks to everyone who's watching. So if you're watching live on Twitch, LinkedIn, listening to the audio only or video only version of the podcast, please feel free to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. You can listen to us on Spotify if you're not already. If you're watching live on Twitch, please hit us up with that follow. And if you're on YouTube, hit us with a subscribe. We've got plenty more content coming out every single week. The next couple of guests we've got are some more interesting ones. I'm hoping you're enjoying the change in the types of content we're doing things a bit more casually, a bit less scripted. And I hope you're enjoying the new types of guests coming on. Thanks, guys. Bye for now.